Hey, welcome to another one of our amazing interviews with one of our coaches. Our featured coach today is Jim Salvucci. He's been a Tiny Habits coach for quite some time. And I got to give you a heads up. You're going to be really impressed with Jim. He is amazing. Why do I say that? Well, because his business is called Guidance for Greatness, and he embodies that name perfectly. Jim, I know that you work with empowering leaders who are struggling with practical driven strategies that actually work in the real world. You have so much education and experience behind you that really help you stand out as far as empowering these leaders to greatness. Tell us a little bit more about who you help and why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah, I work mostly with people who would be called middle managers. Although sometimes I work at higher levels, sometimes I work with aspiring leaders. And I like working with that group because these are people who, it's kind of a push me, pull you kind of thing where they're getting squeezed or getting pulled apart. There's a lot of pressure on them. And it's really, really tough to be a good leader, let alone a great leader when you're a middle manager. And I've been there. I come from an academic background. I was a dean. I was a vice president. And so, when I was a dean, I was decidedly middle management. I had a lot of authority, a lot of autonomy, but I also answered to a provost and I answered to a president. And so there were a lot of pressures on me from every direction. And when you're dealing with faculty, there's a lot of pressure, period. And, so I really understand that circumstance very, very well. But it doesn't mean you should abandon your values just because you're under pressure. In fact, it's just the opposite. That's when you double down on your values. That's when you become the person you really want to be. And your behaviors have to reflect that at every turn. And the more acutely aware you are of that fact, of that reality, the better off you'll be. And you'll be able to lead your team members far more effectively, and you'll be able to interact with the people above you far more effectively.
I love that, Jim, and that sounds great. But then the question is, well, how do you do that? I mean, how do you really double down on your values?
Don't abandon them, first off, which unfortunately is often the way. I mean, what we find in every field is that people get promoted because of their technical expertise, let's say. Right. Like right now, I've been working with some lawyers in public defense. And, these are people who got promoted to supervisory positions because they're great lawyers. Right. And that's what they love and they're good at it. But that doesn't mean they know how to manage or lead. Right. But it actually does, because the values, they're idealistic, right? They're mission driven people. And the values that drove them are the values that they need to lean on as they're supervising. I'm putting together a presentation I'm supposed to be giving in, I guess, May. It's February now. And I was thinking about doing one on justice itself for these public defenders. So, these are people who are keenly aware of the power of justice. They face injustice every day. My wife was a public defender. They deal with this in the courts.
Interesting.
Yeah, they deal with this every day. So I'm aware of that, and they're aware of the issues of justice. But then a lot of times they go into the workplace where they're supposed to be leading, and they don't enact that same justice. Right? They don't think to do that. They think that we got to meet a deadline. We've got to do this. We got to do that. I got to act this way. I got to get respect. But if they actually came from that place of justice, which is their internal mission, theoretically, then they would be a better leader. So that's what I mean by doubling down on values.
Awesome. Okay, so you are a Tiny Habits certified coach. So how does that overlay with helping people rise to greatness, especially leaders? How does that play into that?
It's the whole Tiny Habits ethos, right? You got to start somewhere. Start tiny. One of the reasons I became a Tiny Habits coach, I don't know if I ever told you this. I was working with a coach, and she became a Tiny Habits coach, and she told me about it. Libby McCready, and she
Libby's great.
Yeah, she was doing her apprenticeship, and I was one of her clients, sort of. I was one of her coachees, and I loved it, partially because I was coming to a new realization. I was raised, I'm 61 years old. I'm of a generation where you were sort of raised that, you really don't change much. You are who you are. My father was like that. My father's a wonderful man, great leader. But he thought that he couldn't change, and he suffered late in life because he wouldn't consider changing his, ways of looking at the world. And I don't mean he had a bad attitude toward the world. He had a bad attitude toward himself, right? And so I realized, partially through Tiny Habits, that I could actually change myself for the better. I could make changes that would help me grow more content, grow happier in this world. And so, but I learned that it isn't this big splash. It isn't this sudden, like today I'm one person, next day I'm another person. I made little tiny changes, in terms of things like, my limiting beliefs, right? Created
Mm.
habits around those, which I often do with clients. That's a very, very popular one. And so that helped me become a different person, and I can share that with others. So with leadership, it's the same thing. Leadership is about becoming improvement all the time. You're always improving. And that's always been part of my ethos that you're, I don't go for perfection. I go for improvement. I don't believe in perfection. I believe in improvement. And so this all kind of worked together for me. But as a leader, that's important to understand. You're not going to get it right the first time. You're not going to be great out of the gate. You're not going to be perfect. You want to be, as we say in Tiny Habits, you want to be consistent, not perfect. And so I use that line a lot for myself and for others. And so developing leadership using tiny habits techniques actually works very well. And a lot of it is that growing self-awareness, which is the key first step of great leadership, becoming self-aware, using tiny
Mm.
habits to become more self-aware.
So give us some examples of that.
Yeah, well, I'll give you the one I sort of gave already was, these limiting beliefs, right?
Yeah.
A lot of leaders or would-be leaders struggle because they haven't really been trained. They were promoted for their technical expertise. They're looking around, they see their bosses, and I make a distinction between bosses and leaders, very different things. They look at their bosses and they don't really have any guidance there. But they don't know what to do, so they start imitating the bosses and they just become a boss themselves, right? Leaders instead look inward and try to determine what kind of a person they are, what their character is. That's the first, I call it the 4 C's of leadership. That's the first key to leadership is character, developing your character. Part of that is, let's say, you have an inferiority complex, which is very common, right? You look at the world and say, well, I'm not worthy. I shouldn't be in this job. I'm not really worthy to be here. A lot of people fall into that. And there's a good part of that where you're humble, but there's a bad part of that in that a lot of people actually flip it and become arrogant, because they overcompensate and they've got to prove themselves all the time. And, they exert influence and authority, but that's not leadership. That's bossing. And so what I do is I work with them that overcome that inferiority complex, very often using tiny habits. What's a more positive paradigm that you could have instead of that limiting belief? And then we create a habit around just reversing that, and it's a little brain chemistry going on, right? Stop telling yourself this lie and tell yourself something positive instead.
I love that approach. I also, as you're talking, what comes to mind is that we all have a leadership role in some aspect of our lives. We may not be in middle management. We may not even be in a professional position of leadership, but we have leadership roles in our community and leadership roles in our family. So don't you think, and I think, well, I'm asking a question that I think you're going to say, yeah, but couldn't we all learn these leadership principles?
Yeah. Okay, you're outing me. So I have a blog and podcast I do every week. And a couple weeks ago, I did one that was I called it a mini manifesto. And it's something I've wanted to write for years, and everybody talked me out of it because it's bad marketing. And I recently have decided I don't care about marketing anymore. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of compromising my values, who I am. That's my brand, right? To do the mark, that doesn't make any sense. I consider myself an amateur moral philosopher. My leadership writing and thinking and speaking is moral philosophy. How to be a good person, how to do good in the world. Right? That's what a leader is. That's all it is. And then to your point about everybody's a leader, in different aspects of their lives, it can even be very temporary. I mean, I use the example of, the little girl whose friend is being bullied in the lunchroom, who stands up and says, stop doing that, and then sits down. In that moment is a leader. Maybe she'll never do that again for the rest of her life, but in that moment, she was a leader, right? So we can be a leader just in an instant, and it can go away and never come back. But it's always about tapping into those values, tapping into that moral goodness.
I love that example, because I think all of us can see ourselves that there are situations that we do need to step up and be the leader in. But I guess the question is, how do we gain the courage, or how do we take on that role when we don't feel adequate?
Yeah, and that's where the character piece comes in, right? The self-awareness. Character is a combination of several things. Part of it's your personality, part of it's your experience, part of it's your values, your integrity. Part of it is, and this is often neglected, how other people perceive you, and being aware of that, because that tells you something about yourself. But the biggest part, the part that matters more than any of that, because it's the manifestation of all that, is how you behave, right? I don't care if you say, Well, I meant it's not what you meant, it's what you did, because
Mm,
leadership is moral philosophy, but it's applied moral philosophy, right? The application, the behavior, and tiny habits comes in here, right? Behavior. So how you behave is who you are ultimately as a leader. And so tapping into that character, understanding yourself, that self-awareness can help you become a leader in a moment or throughout a lifetime.
wow, that I think that's a brilliant statement. so
Okay.
so Um, and what comes to mind as you were saying that is sort of like the saying, "I don't care what you say, but I care what you do," because that really is a reflection of who you are, is what you
Right.
do. So when you're helping develop leaders or helping regular people like myself step into leadership roles when that opportunity presents itself, what kind of tiny habits do you recommend, or how do you guide clients through that journey?
Yeah, oh, it is so individual. I when I was doing tiny habits training, I actually came up with dozens and dozens and dozens of habits, recipes
Yeah.
for people for leadership. And I almost never use those because I
Mm.
develop them as I go along. And I've become quite adept at kind of just hearing things and going, okay, well, we can create a habit here. In terms of the
Well, okay,
self-reflect.
I'm gonna stop you
Yeah.
there because I really wanna magnify the fact that you are individualizing and customizing the Tiny
Mhm.
Habits method to your clients individually. I think that's brilliant. There's not a
Yeah.
set mold. It's all individual based off what you hear that individual sharing with you. Okay, keep going. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah.
I
No,
like that.
I think that's very important to my coaching, right? Trying to craft something that works for this
Oh,
person. And we always are doing that, right? Just finding an anchor.
yeah.
It's very
Yeah.
individual. So what is that anchor moment? So in terms of, developing your character, a lot of times it's habits of self-reflection. How are you behaving
Mhm.
at a certain moment? Now, finding an anchor for that can be a little tricky sometimes. I do find that my clients tend to be self-selecting, right? They're
Mm.
not talking to me if they're coming out of the blue, right?
Yeah.
They're already in that mode, in that mindset that they want to make positive changes, they want to improve, right? So because of that, it's often easy to find the anchors because a lot of times they're already thinking about things. And it's like, okay, when I'll use the example of the limiting beliefs. They're often already aware they might not be able to identify the limiting belief, but they know they're telling themselves stuff that isn't really true. They're saying, I am not
Mhm.
worthy. I don't belong here, something like that. So I get them to start thinking about when they're saying that. And they're usually pretty good at finding those moments. And I actually can make that an anchor if they're
Mm.
that aware. I do that all the time. And I'm always surprised because I always think, oh, we're going to have to find an anchor here. And they say, no, I know when I'm doing that. Like, okay, that's easy.
So when somebody is experiencing those limiting beliefs, and that's the anchor moment, what are some examples of some of the behaviors that that limiting belief or recognizing that limiting belief would prompt to combat
Um,
that or to offset that?
well, usually we've developed the positive paradigm that counterposes that, right? So their limiting belief is, I'll use I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy. It could be as simple as I am worthy. I belong here,
Okay.
right? I have this job for a reason, right? I've had this conversation a lot. So you got a promotion. You're in this position. The people who promoted you, are they known for their reckless promotion? No.
Mm,
Are they known for like doing things kind of just like, on the cuff? They just say, oh, I'm just going to promote this person arbitrarily. No. Okay. So why do you think you got promoted? Well, they saw something in me. Do you respect that? Yes. Okay. Now we
mm.
go from there.
Yeah,
Very
so
practical.
silencing that self-doubt. Yeah, the
Yeah.
habit of silencing that. I love that.
Then once we do that, then we can develop a more positive paradigm. And then it's literally every time I think I don't belong here, I stop. This is the tiny behavior. I stop and I say to myself, I do belong. And you think, wow,
Awesome.
that sounds easy. Guess what? It works.
Yeah, it does work. It does work. It quiets that inner critic that we all have.
Yeah. Yeah.
Share with us a few more examples of how you've helped leaders step into the leadership role using tiny habits.
So a lot of it is getting them to create sort of self-care habits, taking care of
Mm,
themselves, which seems a little counterintuitive, but it's not. I find myself doing a lot of, you need to get more sleep. You
yeah.
need to
Yeah.
meditate. You need to, these kinds of things. So developing habits around that, do a lot with sleep. Um,
Mm,
developing habits around those self-care. So you're taking care of yourself. And I loathe cliches. I loathe these little platitudes repeat all the time. But there is one I use all the time because it is so absolutely on the nose. Put the oxygen mask on yourself first. So you want to help these people, you want to help your team members, take care of yourself first. You can't do it otherwise. You'll run out of air. So a lot of it pertains to that. Then there's also habits around how they might approach conversations. Again, it's very highly individual. If they're struggling with confrontation, how to handle that. Habits of, what you can do before you have a tough conversation, advising around that. I don't do that as much as the other stuff, though. It's mostly the self-care.
So besides sleep, because I think we all lack sleep, I think that's just, we think that's a corner we can cut in our lives where we clearly can't. But what are some other challenges that leaders have around self-care that you've seen to be common?
It runs the gamut. The way they eat,
Mm.
the lack of movement, lack of connection sometimes.
Mm.
They limit their social life or they limit their family life in weird ways. Let me tell you I was thinking about this before we start talking, so I want to tell this story. It pertains to this. I had this client, really hard worker, great guy, and he had this routine. At night, he loved just watching TV with his wife. It was just a little quiet time. They didn't have kids. It was just a nice time for them to just watch some TV, relax. They weren't even talking, and they just kind of unwound. But he was, if not a workaholic, on the verge of being a workaholic. So the routine became at 9 p.m., his wife would say, well, I'm going to bed. And she'd get up and she'd go to bed. And he would watch TV for a couple more hours. And
Mm.
then he would turn the TV off and 11 p.m., go and do some work. And then he would go to bed.
Mm.
So he was getting very little sleep. He was getting like 5-6 hours sleep tops. And this was really unhealthy. And he realized it, but he didn't know what to do. We had a very limited amount of time. This is toward the end of our time together. And so I decided to do some quick help for him. I knew we weren't going to totally solve his problem, but that, tiny habits, right? We got to start somewhere. So I decided to focus on the TV, not the work, because I knew it was going to be a much more uphill climb for the work. So, first I established that he didn't really necessarily feel like he had to watch the TV after his wife went to bed. He was just sitting there and he just kept watching. Simple as that. So I established that he was okay with, getting rid of that routine, that portion of his routine. And the tiny habit became when his wife stands up, after his wife stands up, he stands up. Zip. That was it. And
Wow.
he reports back a couple weeks later. First off, he's saying his wife thought he was nuts the first few times he did this. She's like, why are you standing up?
She
And the
probably
first
thought, what's
couple
going on?
times, right, he's like, what are you doing? And he's celebrating. And I don't remember what his celebration was, but she thought he was absolutely bonkers. But he got into it. And the first few times, he just sat back down and kept watching TV. Okay. But of course, what happened? This disrupted the routine. And he realized he was making a conscious choice to sit back down. And he could just as easily make a conscious choice to not sit back down. So he stopped sitting back down. He would go and do work now, not good, but better, because now he's going to bed about 11 o'clock, not 1 a.m., which is what he was doing before. So we caught him a couple more hours sleep. But also, toward the end, he was saying there were a few times he just went to bed. He didn't do the work because now he's thinking about it. So is that disruption, right? Breaking that routine got him to rethink the entire way he was acting. All with that little, just stand up. Just stand up.
What a great example of how simple that behavior is, but designing it based off of his wife standing up, and just then he was in a position where he could make a conscious decision as to whether he was going to sit back down or not.
It's up to him. And the beauty was that she was like clockwork. You could set your watch by her. That made it a lot easier. Easy anchor, right?
Yeah, a reliable anchor moment.
Right. So she got up, he get up. But he said when I told him to do this, we worked through it all, talked it through, explained why and all that. When we did all that, he at first was very skeptical, but he was kind of amused by it. He thought it was kind of a funny thing. And when he did it though, he realized, no, this is a powerful thing. This is incredibly powerful.
Wow. What a small behavior with a huge impact. And sometimes it takes a coach like you who sees the whole picture that can suggest that, because that individual probably would not have come to that on his own. Like, how would he?
No, he was just stuck in his routine. I got another guy meditating by getting him to sit down on the couch. So that's.
Oh, well, okay. So what was that? Because meditation, I think, is a very powerful habit, but we do know based off of, the evidence and people that we've worked with that can be a really difficult habit to create.
Yeah, he wanted to. He was really keen on meditating and he did it from time to time. But, he worked at home. And he worked in the basement. And he and his wife would get his kids bundled together and send them off to school. I don't remember who did what, but I realized there was a moment when the kids were dealt with. He walked into his basement to go do work, and there was a couch there. And he said he would meditate on the couch. And it was like a left turn to go to the couch, a right turn to go to his desk. So the habit was make a left turn. And then since he was so motivated to meditate, he just started meditating.
Yeah. Well, and what you just shared there was consciously designing for success of doing the meditation behavior is
Mhm.
turning left instead of right, of consciously recognizing that that was what needed to happen. That's cool. That's huge. Okay, so this brings up another question. As you work with your clients, do you find that there's a certain time of day where the habits they design are more effective or successful than not? What's been your experience with that?
I don't know about more successful, more needed. I do a
Oh,
lot of habit building morning and night after they
okay.
wake up, before they get to work, or before they go to bed. A lot of them have to do with sleep. A lot of them have to do with telephones. No surprise. Some people love to scroll their phone while they're in bed before they go to sleep and they find themselves there for hours. Others wake up, first thing they do is pick up the phone. So breaking either one of those routines is fairly easy if someone's motivated. If they are not necessarily motivated, or maybe that's not the word I want, but they have a desire to do it, right? They want to do it. They want their life to be different. They realize this is disruptive,
Yeah.
but it's so easy just to pick up the phone and do what you've always done. And so
Yeah.
much of it is, be, you know, after you brush your teeth, leave your phone in the bathroom or something like
Yeah.
for either one of those, that works for both morning and night. Phone scrolling,
Yeah.
or put it out of reach is another one. If they don't want to have it in a different
Mm.
room, just say, put it out of reach. So if you wake up, you've got to get out of bed to get it.
Mm.
And then, of course, the Maui habit is I give that one out like candy. And so,
Me too. Me too.
yeah, it's so easy. It's so simple, so whatever it is, most people, it's their feet hit the floor. That's what it is for me. Today's going to be a great day. Boom. That helps a lot too. And so that one I
Okay.
use all the time.
Well, of course, and you've just hit on my favorite all-time habit that has totally, and I'll give the Maui habit credit for saving my life, not just changing my life, but truly saving
Wow.
my life. And for listeners that aren't familiar with what that is just the habit that after my feet hit the floor in the morning, I'll say it's going to be a great day. So why do you, Jim, give it out as candy? Because I love that habit. That's almost a required habit for all of my clients. But why? Talk to me more about why you do that.
Because when I first, okay, here's what I did before I started using the Maui habit. I would wake up and I go to move and I'd groan and I'd grunt. Maybe I'd curse a little if I had a rough day coming. I think about what I had to do that day.
Yeah, yeah,
Now I get out of bed and I say, today's going to be a great day. And even if I don't believe it, I'm saying it and I'm not groaning and grunting. And so that's
yeah.
totally changed how I approach my day. Totally.
You know, and what does that take? 10 seconds to do? 5 seconds to do?
Less than that.
Yeah.
Moments. Yeah.
But
Moments.
and I like you would dread getting up some days because I knew I had a hard day ahead or I was recovering from a hard day behind me.
Right.
It's like, oh
Right.
no, not another day. So I love it that the impact of the Maui habit has had the same impact on you that it had on me. What impact do you see that it has on your clients that you recommend it for?
Same, very much the
Same.
same. They some of them really they're just like, I just greet the day different. Like I just have a
Mm,
very different feel
yeah.
throughout the day. And it's sort of like meditation in the morning, right? It's not as involved, but it's sort of the same thing, right? You're just putting a positive spin on your morning, a little self-reflective, not worrying about what's coming, not worrying about what happened the day before, not wondering about did I get enough sleep because there's a lot of stress about that,
Mm,
which is debilitating.
yeah.
Not worrying about do I ache or, whatever, is it cold? You're just focused in the moment. It puts you in the moment but projects into the day.
Very, very powerful habit. I love that you recommend that. I love that you have your clients do that. So, Jim, you have recently written a book. I know you have a podcast. You're a fabulous public speaker. I've heard you speak before, and you just are very captivating. You just published a new book. Talk to us a little bit about that, and also share with us how people can find you that are interested in learning more from you.
Yeah, the book is called Greater Than Great. It's available on Amazon, and it is a series of essays. They're based on my blog. It's 30 different
Mm.
essays divided up into 4 sections. And the first one, the introduction, is actually based on the eulogy I gave for my father. My father was and that's where the title comes from. My father was, he was a newspaper pressman. He printed newspapers. That's what he did. Highly skilled labor, union work. And then he became a union leader. He ran his union local in Philadelphia for a number of years. But he was never anybody, you'll find no statues to Don Salvucci. There's no memory of him as this great person. There's no record of that. But he was deeply good person. He wanted to do good. He wasn't perfect, but he wanted to do good in the world. He wanted to make the world better. Right? Very charitable man, very generous, very giving, very loving. And my argument in the introduction and throughout the book is that there's something about goodness that's greater than great. A great person is somebody who is remembered and thought about, but that they're not necessarily a good person. A good person is and when it comes to leadership, a good person is even more, it's more important to be good than to be great, even though I use great in many things that I talk about. But to be a deeply good person and to practice that goodness makes you a great leader.
You
So
know,
that's basically it.
I love that. I love that you just said that. Because as you said that, I think of so many great leaders that are also good, and the goodness is what makes them great.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, there's people with statues, right,
Mm.
who were good people, right? And
Yeah.
that matters, but there's plenty of people with statues who weren't so good, and maybe they led armies or
Yeah.
whatever, but they weren't really good people. And
Yeah.
that matters, and that's another thing about leadership is that you cannot compartmentalize your virtues. Your character is not something you compartmentalize. It needs to be
Okay.
throughout your life.
Explain that a little bit more.
Yeah, I'll give you an example because I've seen this. You can't be a wonderful person at home and a creep at work or vice versa and call yourself a good person. It doesn't stand.
Okay.
Or even within work, you can't be, really, really good at, some aspect of your job, but you kind of fudge the budget numbers a little and say, oh, well, that's okay because that's different. No, it's all of a piece. It's got to be your character. That's what integrity is. Integrity consists of three factors. If you think of a chair, like a wooden chair, we talk about a chair having physical integrity. Well, that means three things. One, that it's solid, right? You wouldn't sit on a chair that's made of balsa wood. Two, that it's whole, right? It's not missing any parts. You wouldn't sit on a chair that was missing a couple legs. And three, that it's reliable, that you can trust it, that you know it's there. It's the same thing with moral or human integrity. Exactly the same thing. It needs to be solid, it needs to be whole, and you need to be reliable. And the wholeness is that lack of compartmentalizing. It needs to be throughout your life. It's holistic.
It needs to be, yeah, I love that. That congruence of character, that it's
Mhm.
congruent in every aspect. So, well, Jim, I've learned so much from just talking to you. Of course, I knew this would be a fun discussion because I think you're brilliant. I love the brilliance that you bring to our Tiny Habits coach community. So I want to thank you for that. If you want to learn more from Jim, those of you that are listening, and I encourage you to do that because he really, truly is brilliant and he really embodies what he's talking about today. He is not only a good person, but he's also a great leader. And we see that in our Tiny Habits community. And I also see that in the work that he does. So, Jim, thank you for making the world a better place, especially amongst people that are in leadership positions and helping them develop to be great leaders who are good people all across the board. What's the best way for people to get a hold of you? Or I know you have a TED Talk. You mentioned your book. Yeah, please go find Jim's book. I'm going to do that as well because I know it's a new book out. And of course, you can find Jim in our Tiny Habits Coach directory. But what's the best way for people to get a hold of you if they want you to speak or to do a workshop or to just learn more about you or from you?
Yeah, you can go to my website, guidanceforgreatness.com, all one word, guidance for greatness. You can also just email me, jim@jimsalvucci.com, SALVUCCI. The book is Greater Than Great. My TED Talk is called Swizzle, the Way of the Change Agent. So my TEDx, if you want to check that out, that's on YouTube. But probably the easiest thing is just email me, jim@jimsalvucci.com.
Well, Jim, thanks for spending some time with us today and sharing your wisdom. I took a bunch of notes that I'm going to go back and review because I really fully believe in the work that you're doing. And I want to become a better person so that I'm a better leader. And you've inspired me to do that today. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Linda. Appreciate that.